two Russian assault boats, identified as rigid-hull inflatable platforms modified for troop transport, were navigating the center of the Dnipro River tributaries, carrying two squads of infantry toward the contested western bank. A Ukrainian reconnaissance drone, a specialized Matrice 300 RTK, equipped with a high-resolution Zenmuse H20N thermal sensor, was hovering 250 meters overhead. The sensor was locked on the heat signatures of the outboard motors. In less than 60 seconds, the entire formation was decimated. There was no escape, no secondary chance for survival, and no tactical recovery possible as FPV drones, smaller than a standard tactical backpack but carrying high explosive payloads, delivered the final kinetic blows. This engagement was a clear snapshot of the shifting reality of the conflict in late 2025. At 8:14 on November 28, 2025, a heavy, freezing mist had blanketed the riverine sectors in the Kherson Oblast. Russian commanders from the 810th Naval Infantry Brigade saw what they believed was a window of tactical opportunity. For several days, they had been probing Ukrainian shoreline defenses with small, dismounted infantry groups while gaining minimal ground. The fog offered a perceived concealment from the pervasive Ukrainian drone networks that dominate the low sky. Based on this assumption of degraded surveillance, they decided to commit a waterborne assault. The plan was straightforward. Two vessels would cross the 400-meter stretch of open water, push through the dense reeds of the opposite bank, and establish a temporary bridgehead before Ukrainian surveillance could vector artillery or mortar fires. Ukrainian reconnaissance operators from the 124th Separate Territorial Defense Brigade, specifically the Flying Skull Drone Company, had been monitoring this specific crossing point for months. Intelligence had marked the coordinates red on their digital battle maps, pre-calculating drone flight paths, signal relay positions, and artillery kill zones. At 8:22, despite the fog, the thermal imaging sensors detected two distinct heat signatures emerging from the Russian-controlled shoreline. One lead boat was visible, followed by a second vessel, spaced 35 meters behind. The heat from the 50-horsepower outboard motors glowed white on the operator's screens. The first FPV strike drone, a customized 7-inch quadcopter carrying a 1.5-kilogram PG-7VS-shaped charge, was launched from a concealed position 3 kilometers away. The first strike occurred at 8:23 and 44 seconds. The drone pilot, utilizing a high-gain signal repeater to maintain a clean video link through the mist, struck the lead boat mid-river. The shaped charge penetrated the thin hull and the engine block simultaneously. Secondary fires erupted as the fuel line ignited. The explosion did not sink the craft instantly, but it removed all forward momentum and destroyed the steering mechanism, forcing the survivors to abandon the vessel and plunge into the freezing water. The river, which the Russian doctrine still describes as a rapid transit route, had been transformed into a fixed killing zone. Weighted down by 25 kilograms of body armor, ammunition, and cold weather gear, every motion of the soldiers in the water was slowed to a crawl. The second boat attempted a high-speed evasive maneuver, weaving in a S pattern to break the drone's target lock. However, the Ukrainian FP5 operator maintained a consistent intercept geometry, accounting for the wind speed and the vessel's velocity. At 8:25, the second FP5 drone struck the vessel's stern. The impact detonated the remaining fuel reserves, causing the boat to spiral out of control before eventually drifting into the dense, tangled reeds of the shoreline. Thermal footage later confirmed that the wreckage was trapped in the vegetation, signifying that the mission was a total loss. Every movement from the initial launch to the final impact had been seen, tracked, and punished in real time. This was not a failure of courage, but a failure of outdated tactical assumptions. As the conflict near Pokrovsk and the southern Axis drags on into 2026, the cost of failed maneuvers has grown exponentially heavier. Control of the low sky, the altitude between 10 and 500 meters, has become the ultimate deciding factor in modern combat. The side that maintains constant, uninterrupted observation can dictate exactly when violence begins and when it ends. The tactical question is no longer why these two boats were destroyed, but how any modern force can still believe it can move undetected in a battle space where the air never looks away. The river crossing began as a routine movement that many Russian units still believe can slip through the gaps in attention. But in this environment, there are no gaps. The evolution of this specific engagement demonstrated a deliberate, patient hunt rather than a desperate or lucky ambush. The drone operators did not force an immediate strike upon the first detection. Instead, the priority was total situational control. The camera followed the boats long enough to confirm the direction, the spacing of the troops, and the timing of the Russian reinforcement cycle. When the FP-5 pilot finally committed to the dive, the attack was clean and surgical. Survivors who swam toward the second boat acted on pure survival instinct rather than a coordinated plan, believing that distance from the burning lead craft would restore a measure of safety. That assumption proved fatal. The drone system simply shifted focus to the next target without a second of delay. By 8:42, the damaged boats had drifted into the shallows. A heavy Baba Yaga-class bomber drone capable of carrying multiple 82mm mortar rounds or specialized 5-kilogram drop munitions was brought in to finalize the elimination of the remaining assets. This platform, which operates with a much higher degree of stability, approached the target area with mechanical patience. From the air, the reeds that might have offered horizontal concealment to a soldier on the ground only served to outline their thermal signatures more sharply against the cold, dark water. When the first munition was released, the overpressure and fragmentation removed the last operational threats in the reeds. Thermal imaging confirmed that the heat signatures faded rapidly into the surrounding debris. This sequence illustrates the complete combat chain that now defines Ukrainian tactical successes: persistent observation, FPV interception, transition to heavy bomber delivery, and final thermal verification. The most critical detail of the engagement was the total absence of a recovery gap between these actions. There was no moment where the surviving Russian soldiers could regroup, signal for medical extraction, or exploit the confusion of the first explosion. Once the boats entered the monitored zone, the outcome was mathematically locked. The common belief in older military manuals that leaving a damaged platform creates a second chance for the infantry does not hold in an environment where multiple drones share the same digital picture in a synchronized network. When the camera shifted from the destroyed vessels to the individual soldiers struggling on the shoreline, the psychological breakdown of the force became visible. Footage from the 124th Brigade's FP-5 units showed Russian soldiers reacting not as a professional unit, but as isolated targets. The first change was total confusion. Men scanned the sky too late, their bodies freezing as the choice of reactions narrowed. Some dropped flat on the wet ground, hoping that motionless shapes would blend into the mud and escape the thermal sensor's logic. Others pressed themselves against the trunks of thin trees, trusting natural cover that only works against a ground-based observer. A few even attempted to play dead in the open, assuming the drones were programmed to ignore non-moving shapes. None of these responses achieved the intended effect. From an altitude of 150 meters, the FPV system removes the traditional limits of horizontal sight. Stillness did not hide the targets. It only made their outlines easier to track and verify over time. The drone did not rush its final approach. It circled the area, adjusted its height for the best angle of attack, and waited until certainty replaced guesswork. Traditional infantry training teaches the importance of moving between cover and controlling noise. Yet all of these skills assume an observer limited by the horizon. Three-dimensional control changes the relationship between space and safety. A bush is no longer concealment, and a trench is no longer a shield when the threat is vertical and stays in place as long as the battery allows. This shift from opportunity-based attacks to a system of industrial-scale elimination is now the standard operational procedure in sectors like Pokrovsk. FPV drones are no longer treated as miracle weapons or emergency measures. They are the primary tools of the front line. In early 2023, such strikes were rare experiments framed as unusual successes. By 2026, Ukrainian units fly dozens of sorties every single day. The process now mirrors an assembly line. Drones are prepared, launched, replaced, and relaunched in a steady, relentless cycle. This rhythm removes the idea of a strike being a rare or lucky event. It is now the expected statistical outcome for any detected movement within 5 kilometers of the line of contact. Russian tactical decisions continue to compound these Ukrainian advantages. The choice to cross open water during a fog assumed that surveillance would be degraded. However, Ukrainian thermal imaging maintained full tracking capability throughout the period of reduced visibility. Using a predictable crossing point, channeled the formation into a kill zone where maneuver was physically impossible. The compression of spacing between the boats, as they negotiated the narrow channels in the reeds, concentrated the targets and allowed sequential strikes to destroy both platforms in under 2 minutes. For the Flying Skull Company, this victory required a minimal expenditure of resources. 2 FPV drones costing $800 each and 1 heavy drone mission. Total cost was under $10,000 to destroy equipment and a specialized assault group worth millions. The final footage released by the Ukrainian units showed the progression with haunting clarity. The first frames captured the boats moving confidently through the lifting fog. The subsequent shots showed the FPV drones diving, the impact appearing as a bright white flash followed by expanding gray smoke. The final thermal confirmation showed only cratered shorelines, burning hulks of rubber and metal, and debris scattered across the riverbanks. This engagement demonstrated the patterns that Ukrainian forces have refined over years of high-intensity drone warfare. Persistent reconnaissance identifies the movement early. Pre-planned coordination enables a rapid response, and precision strikes exploit the terrain where vehicles and men are most vulnerable. When every link in the chain, from the drone pilot to the intelligence officer, does its job properly, the enemy has no viable path to success. Nazar Trenner, a veteran commander in the drone sector, noted that while fog often pushes Russian forces to rely on infantry movement, whenever any vehicle or boat appears, it is destroyed almost immediately. This observation captures the fundamental shift in combat. Armor and boats provide theoretical firepower and mobility, but in practice, they serve as high-value beacons for strike systems that the Russian military has been unable to counter effectively. The era of the unseen maneuver has ended, replaced by a battlefield that is always watched and always lethal.